Iran lost its entire navy in 39 days. Its supreme leader is dead. Its air force is grounded. Its missile factories are rubble. And yet, on the morning of April 9th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps collected approximately $2 million in Bitcoin before the first tanker had even finished its paperwork. That single fact breaks every assumption the American financial system was built on. The most comprehensive sanctions architecture in human history, a web of banking restrictions, asset freezes, and transaction monitoring that took 30 years to construct, was bypassed by a QR code printed on a laminated sheet inside a small office on Larak Island. This is not the story of a military that refused to die. This is the story of something far more dangerous, a regime that lost the war but figured out how to monetize the aftermath. While American destroyers were still counting the debris of Iran's sunken fleet, the Revolutionary Guard was already standing at the world's most important shipping lane with a digital payment terminal and an offer nobody could refuse: pass through or don't pass at all. To understand how this happened, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is, not as a geographic feature, but as an economic choke point with no alternative. 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through a waterway that is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Every supertanker leaving the Persian Gulf with crude oil bound for Asia, Europe, or anywhere else on the planet has exactly two options. It goes through Hormuz or it turns around. There is no pipeline that replaces it. There is no canal that routes around it. There is no fleet of aircraft that can carry what a supertanker carries. If you want oil from the Gulf, you go through the strait. And as of March 30th, 2026, going through the strait means paying Iran. The mechanism Iran built is called the Strait of Hormuz Management Plan, passed by the Iranian parliament on March 30th. The name sounds administrative. The reality is a toll booth operated by a designated terrorist organization at the most critical shipping junction on Earth. Under the plan, every vessel seeking to transit the strait must first submit a detailed intelligence package to contacts linked directly to the Revolutionary Guard. The package includes the ship's International Maritime Organization identification number, the full name and nationality of every crew member aboard, a complete manifest of all cargo with origin and destination details, a full ownership and charter history of the vessel going back multiple transfers, and the final port of destination with expected arrival times. This is not Port Authority paperwork. This is an intelligence dossier. Every ship that pays the toll is handing the Revolutionary Guard a comprehensive picture of global shipping movements, cargo flows, corporate ownership structures, and crew vulnerabilities. The Guard is not just collecting money, it is collecting a surveillance database of the entire maritime economy, one ship at a time, in exchange for a radio code that lets the vessel proceed. Once the paperwork is submitted and verified, the ship receives a transit authorization code broadcast on a designated radio frequency. Without that code, the vessel does not pass. The ships that have attempted to pass without the code have encountered Revolutionary Guard patrol boats that make the consequences of non-compliance immediately clear. The code is the key, and the key costs $1 per barrel of oil on board. For a standard, very large crude carrier loaded with 2 million barrels, that is a $2 million transaction, payable in Bitcoin, payable in Tether, payable in Chinese yuan, transferred through a bank that does not touch the American financial system, not payable in United States dollars, not processable through SWIFT, not visible to the Office of Foreign Assets Control in Washington. The payment infrastructure Iran built for this system did not appear overnight. It was assembled deliberately over the better part of a decade, specifically to defeat the sanctions architecture that the United States had spent 30 years constructing. To understand how it works, you need to understand what American sanctions actually do and what they do not do. American sanctions work by controlling access to the dollar. The dollar is the global reserve currency. Roughly 80% of all international trade is settled in dollars at some point in the transaction chain. To move money anywhere on Earth for any purpose, you almost always need a bank that has access to the American financial system. American sanctions work by threatening to cut any bank anywhere in the world off from that access if it processes transactions for a sanctioned entity. This system is extraordinarily powerful against entities that need dollars. It is almost completely ineffective against entities that have built parallel systems specifically to avoid needing dollars. Iran understood this vulnerability long before 2026. Beginning in approximately 2018, after the Trump administration reimposed sanctions following the withdrawal from the nuclear deal, Iranian financial institutions began accelerating their investment in cryptocurrency infrastructure. The goal was not to speculate on Bitcoin prices. The goal was to build a payment rail that the American Treasury could not touch. By 2024, Iran was processing an estimated $3 billion per year in cryptocurrency transactions linked to sanctions evasion, according to blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis. The Revolutionary Guard, in particular, had developed relationships with over-the-counter cryptocurrency brokers operating out of the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and several smaller jurisdictions that maintained ambiguous regulatory postures toward digital assets. These brokers could receive cryptocurrency from Iranian accounts and convert it to local currency, gold, or goods without any transaction ever touching an American bank. The toll booth system built on Larak Island in March 2026 was not improvised. It was the operational deployment of a financial infrastructure that had been under construction for 8 years. Larak Island itself is a critical piece of the geography that most coverage of this crisis has ignored entirely. The island sits inside the Strait of Hormuz, roughly 40 kilometers from the Iranian coast, positioned directly adjacent to the main eastbound shipping lane. It is small, approximately 25 square kilometers, and before the war, it was used primarily as an oil storage and transfer facility. After the American strikes began dismantling Iranian military infrastructure on the mainland, the Revolutionary Guard quietly shifted the administrative apparatus of the toll collection system to Larak. The island is close enough to the shipping lane to be operationally relevant, difficult enough to strike without risking the shipping infrastructure the Americans want to protect, and positioned in Iranian territorial waters in a way that complicates legal justifications for a direct assault. The radio communications from Larak reach every vessel in the main shipping channel. The patrol boats that enforce compliance with the toll system can reach any non-compliant vessel within minutes. The cryptocurrency wallets receiving payment are hosted on servers that are not in Iran and not on Larak Island and not reachable by American warrants. The physical presence is on the island. The financial presence is distributed across a network of blockchain addresses that change routing patterns regularly to defeat tracing algorithms. The first confirmed payment under the system was processed on March 31st, the day after the parliamentary vote. A Panamanian-flagged tanker carrying approximately 1.8 million barrels of Kuwaiti crude submitted its documentation package, received its transit code, and transferred approximately $1.8 million in Tether, a dollar-pegged stablecoin, to a wallet address provided in the authorization paperwork. American intelligence tracked the payment within hours. The Tether moved through 4 intermediate wallets in under 90 minutes before arriving at an address that blockchain analysts subsequently linked to a brokerage operating out of Istanbul. The money was effectively laundered within the same business day. By April 14th, according to reporting from multiple defense and financial intelligence sources, Iran had processed an estimated 47 separate toll payments totaling somewhere between $60 and $90 million in cryptocurrency. This is not a trivial sum for a government whose oil revenues had been reduced to near zero by the American blockade. It is not enough to replace those oil revenues, but it is enough to pay salaries, enough to purchase critical imports through back channels, and enough to demonstrate to the Revolutionary Guard's own internal audience that the financial strategy is working. The Chinese dimension of this story is the element that transforms it from a regional curiosity into a structural challenge to the entire American-led global financial order. China purchases approximately 90% of Iran's exported oil under normal conditions. Chinese refineries on the eastern coast process Iranian crude that comes in on Chinese-flagged tankers through supply chains that Beijing has spent years deliberately insulating from American regulatory reach. When the American blockade reduced Iranian oil exports to near zero, Chinese refineries lost approximately 1.4 million barrels per day of supply. That is not a rounding error. That is a meaningful share of China's total oil import volume. Beijing's response was to do something unprecedented. Several Chinese-affiliated tankers began requesting transit codes from the Larak Island system and paying the toll in Chinese yuan rather than cryptocurrency. The yuan payments moved through Chinese state bank subsidiaries operating in Gulf jurisdictions that maintain correspondent relationships with Chinese financial institutions rather than American ones. American sanctions cannot reach yuan transactions that never touch a dollar correspondent bank. The payments were legal under Chinese law. They were compliant with the Larak Island system's terms, and there was nothing the United States Treasury could do about them in the immediate term. This created the specific confrontation scenario that the American blockade had been designed to prevent, but had not adequately planned for. An American destroyer intercepts a Chinese-flagged tanker in the Gulf of Oman. The tanker has paid Iran's toll. Under the rules, Trump announced that payment makes the tanker a valid interdiction target regardless of flag. But if the American captain boards that vessel, he is effectively seizing Chinese state adjacent property that paid a toll through a legal Chinese financial institution. Beijing would have grounds to characterize that boarding as an act of economic warfare against China, not just against Iran. The cryptocurrency and yuan payment systems together created a situation where the financial mechanism of the blockade, stopping money from reaching Iran, was being defeated simultaneously by decentralized technology and by the political reality that America's largest economic competitor had decided to root around the sanctions architecture using its own currency. Neither of these problems has a simple naval solution. You cannot torpedo a Bitcoin wallet. You cannot board a yuan transaction. The weapons that destroyed Iran's navy are precisely the wrong tools for the problem Iran pivoted to after its navy was destroyed. The blockchain analytics community has been tracking the Larak Island wallet cluster since early April, and what they have found illustrates the sophistication of the system in operation. The primary receiving wallets rotate on a schedule of approximately 72 hours, making sustained tracking difficult without continuous monitoring resources. The intermediate routing wallets use a technique called chain hopping, converting assets between different cryptocurrencies at each step to obscure the trail across different blockchain ledgers. The final off ramp points, the places where cryptocurrency becomes spendable local currency or goods, are distributed across at least six jurisdictions, including Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Oman, and two Central Asian states. Each of these off ramp points represents a separate legal and diplomatic challenge for American enforcement. The United States Treasury has sanctioned cryptocurrency wallets before. It sanctioned the Tornado Cash Mixer Protocol in 2022, the first time a software protocol rather than a human entity was designated under sanctions law. But sanctioning the Larak Island wallet cluster faces a specific obstacle that the Tornado Cash case did not. The wallets are not exclusively receiving proceeds of sanctions violations. They are receiving transit fees from vessels of multiple nationalities whose legal status as sanctions violators is genuinely contested under international maritime law. Sanctioning the wallet cluster means designating every vessel that paid the toll, including vessels from countries that have not agreed that the toll is illegal, including Chinese state vessels, as sanctions violators. The diplomatic cost of that designation would exceed the financial benefit almost immediately. The Iranian government is fully aware of this dilemma. The Strait of Hormuz management plan was not designed as a permanent replacement for oil revenues. It was designed as a demonstration of asymmetric financial leverage. The message it sends is specific and carefully calibrated. Iran is telling every country in the world that uses the strait that the American sanctions architecture cannot actually protect freedom of navigation if Iran decides to exercise control over the toll. Every tanker captain who pays the fee is implicitly acknowledging that the Revolutionary Guard's authority over the strait is real. Every payment that clears without American interdiction is evidence that the blockade has a boundary it cannot cross. The economic numbers accumulating under the toll system tell a secondary story that is less visible but equally significant. The $1 per barrel fee generates revenue that is structured in a way that is deliberately separate from Iran's official state finances. The cryptocurrency proceeds do not flow through the Iranian central bank. They do not appear in official Iranian budget documents. They are controlled directly by the Revolutionary Guard's financial apparatus, a structure that has maintained significant economic independence from the Iranian civilian government for decades. This means that even in a scenario where Iran negotiates a deal that reopens the strait and eliminates the official toll, the Revolutionary Guard will have accumulated a pool of liquid assets held in cryptocurrency and converted to physical goods and gold that exists entirely outside any agreement's reach. The ceasefire framework being discussed in diplomatic channels as of mid April includes provisions for the elimination of the toll system as part of any comprehensive agreement. Iranian civilian negotiators have reportedly indicated willingness to end the formal toll collection. What none of the diplomatic frameworks yet addresses is what happens to the assets already collected, who has authority to enforce the Guard's compliance with any agreement to stop collecting, and whether the payment infrastructure that made the system work can actually be dismantled, or whether it simply goes dormant, waiting for the next crisis. The United States built the most sophisticated sanctions enforcement architecture in history. It took 30 years and the cooperation of most of the world's major financial institutions to construct. Iran, in the space of 8 years of preparation and 6 weeks of active operation, demonstrated that a motivated adversary with access to cryptocurrency markets, Chinese financial partnerships, and physical control of a strategic waterway can generate meaningful revenue streams that exist outside that architecture's reach. The lesson is not lost on any government watching from the outside. Russia has been watching. North Korea has been watching. Venezuela has been watching. The template Iran built on Larak Island in March 2026 is available to any state that controls a choke point and is willing to invest in the technical and diplomatic infrastructure to monetize it. The deeper question the toll booth raises is not whether the United States can eventually force Iran to shut it down. With sufficient pressure and time, it probably can. The question is whether the demonstration itself has already changed the global financial landscape in ways that cannot be reversed by shutting down the specific wallets on Larak Island. Every sanctions architect in Washington watching cryptocurrency payments clear in real time knew that their system had a structural vulnerability. Every central banker in Beijing watching yuan payments reach Larak Island knew that their decade long campaign to internationalize the renminbi had just produced a proof of concept nobody expected to see in a war zone. Every government anywhere in the world that has a strategic choke point and a grudge against the dollar system took notes. Iran lost its navy, it lost its air force, it lost its supreme commander, and it built a toll booth that collected nearly $100 million before the ceasefire talks finished their first round. That is not a story about military defeat. That is a story about what comes after military defeat when the defeated party refuses to accept the financial terms of surrender. The mines are still on the seafloor. The Larak Island radio is still broadcasting transit codes. The cryptocurrency wallets are still rotating. And somewhere on a server that no American warrant can reach, the Revolutionary Guard's balance sheet keeps growing, one Bitcoin transaction at a time.